Non. Ah si, ça marche. تمام. تمام. مساء الخير. أنا للأسف مش ممكن أكلم بالعربي، عشان كده أنا أكلم بالفرنساوي وعكسلا يعمل الترجمة. مش كده؟ تمام. Je suis très très content d'accueillir aujourd'hui le groupe NUBTi, qui est un anagramme de... Alors, c'est assez compliqué, mais c'est très bien trouvé hein, pour parler de l'antique Coptos, pardon, de l'antique Naqada, excuse-moi. خلي بالك عشان انا فاهم يعني مش ممكن اكلمك انا فاهم كله.
ونقادة بالهيروغليفي اسمها نوبت، فنوبتي بيبقى الناس بتوع نقادة.
Donc c'est une très très bonne idée d'avoir repris les archives de Petrie concernant la fouille de ce site et d'avoir entrepris de retranscrire tous ces cahiers de fouilles qui sont extrêmement mal écrits.
هو الحلو مع الفكره دي ان انا بجامل نفسي وبجامل نفسنا، فبيقول انها فكره حلوه قوي اننا رجعنا نشتغل في الارشيف بتاعت بيتري، وهي فعلا للاسف ارشيف خطها وحش جدا زي كل الاثريين الكبار.
Ok. Et je suis très heureux aussi de voir qu'il y a autour, avec Axel, un groupe de chercheurs égyptiens extrêmement dynamique qui, cette année, a été participé à une conférence internationale en Pologne, a été également faire un séjour d'études et de travail dans les musées en Angleterre, a fait également une autre conférence en Angleterre, et est à l'origine d'un très impressionnant article dans le dernier IFAO qui est paru la semaine dernière.
وفعلا انا يعني المدير قال كده وانا محظوظه جدا ان الفريق اللي معانا ناس دايناميك قوي وانشطه وبيشتغلوا بشكل جامد. كمان احنا السنه دي بالذات عملنا شغل كتير، رحنا بولندا مع وفاء برديس ومروه نبريزنت في المؤتمر اسمه Egypt at its Origins، ورحنا اليو كي كلنا مع بعض وبالذات مع مساعده كبيره من اماني مع الروبرت اندرسون تراست والكونكشنز بتاعتك هناك. عملنا محاضره برضو في الفريندز اوف ذا بيتري ميوزيوم اسوسيشن، ومش فاكره ايه تاني وعملنا وتعبنا الناس كتير هنا عن مع المقاله بتاعتنا في البيفاو اللي هي اكتر من 50 صفحه، فكتر خيركم واحنا متاسفين جدا باسم التيم.
Et je voudrais aussi insister sur l'importance de ce projet parce que ce site est celui sur lequel Petrie avait établi ces fameuses sequence dates qui ont permis d'établir toute la chronologie de Naqada. Et ce qu'on voit déjà au travers de ce travail, c'est que finalement, c'est cette chronologie qui pourrait être très largement modifiée grâce au travail de ce groupe NUBTi.
وفعلا يعني شكرا يعتبر مشروع مهم بالذات عشان بيتري أسس كل الكرونولوجي بتاعت والتواريخ بتاعت مراحل تطور حضارة نقادة على الموقع ده، فبيبقى له تأثير جامد على الكرونولوجي نفسها وفهمنا على الكرونولوجي.
Bon, je vais vous laisser donc présenter votre projet. Merci beaucoup.
شكرا. Okay, I'm very happy. Sorry, I will not be continuing either in French or in Arabic, but we will continue in English for everyone to be able to follow. And we thank you very much for being here, for attending this seminar, and hopefully we will have this discussion about the methodology, which is the aim of this seminar. So as you see, we come from very old or rather old archive, and we tried to make it into a database, which brings specific challenges that we'll try to present to you today. As you can see, the whole team is here. The four of us will be presenting in the name of the whole team, but Wafa, who is a master's student in Cairo University, and Cologne, Bardis, who is a curator at the Grand Egyptian Museum, Marwa, who is the head of registration in the Cairo Museum that I'm sure you've seen before, a lot of you, Amani, who is also a curator specialized in pottery at the Egyptian Museum, and a PhD student. You've seen her a lot because she's been for 2 years a fellow at the Institute with us. All of us are in this mess together for the past 3 years. I will very, very briefly present my colleagues who will be the team today. So Cinderella, I don't think I need to present her to anyone who is usually at the IFAO. She's our communications specialist with Amr, but she's also partaking in the project with us since 2022. Nader El-Hassanin is recently an associate researcher at the Institute, and he's associate teacher, assistant, lecturer at Cairo University, and Nancy Abdelaziz is a master's student at AUC, and she will, well, actually she will not be the one telling you about her research for some reason, but you will hear a little bit about on collective burials. So thank you for being here, and I won't take more time. I will leave the floor to Nader and to my 3 colleagues to present to you the result of our collective work.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. So first of all, I would like to express our gratitude for the IFAO for having us today. Thank you for having us today. We would like, as a NUBTi team, to share with you our latest outcomes of the project. So before we get into details of the project, let us briefly remember the general context of the Egyptian burial history. So our journey started not with pyramids or gold, but with something far more fundamental, survival, which is survival. So when Egypt was not Egypt yet, they depended on climate, innovation, and human adaptation. So try to imagine Egypt very long ago, during the Paleolithic period. People were moving a lot, following animals and collecting planets. No cities, no farmers, only land with climate, fluctuation of climate, and they were trying to survive. But after thousands of years, what happened? The climate changed. So people during the Paleolithic. Shall I? Started from the beginning, or so during the early Paleolithic period, people started to not move a lot, and they were living along the Nile River. It's better to live better life, but still in a small group. And it's the Neolithic when people discovered how to grow fruits like fruit and garden, and as well as animal health diet and food for the single-cell during the Neolithic period by the 60 million BC. And this brings us to the Naqada culture in the Paleolithic period. That covered almost the whole 40 million BC until the beginning of the first dynasty around 2100 BC, when Narmer managed to unify the Bush and Egypt into one kingdom. So Naqada is a village between the prehistory of Egypt and the dynastic period. And this is divided the village into 3 subdivided villages, starting from Naqada 1 to Naqada 3, that spread to all over Egypt gradually. From the Naqada 1, the culture was spread out of Egypt, but now we advance 3 main cities. 3 main cities developed, emerged during this period. The first 3 very important things was the Naqada culture. Also, people started to bury their dead with boots and tools, people being naturalized and had some trade with others, but the culture was still in the Upper Egypt and not spread so far. But during the Naqada, the cultural statement was teaching the region in the middle of the region. Okay, in the middle of the increase, and the other unit became more powerful, and they were ready for the next step. So during the Naqada, the culture is everywhere, from the south to the north, like both in the Delta and Afghani Americas, and basically writing the capital developed, also having and also leaders fight to control land. So what is the material culture, which is typical for each field, and which will help us in the next slide? So the Naqada culture that we started to do this period, what we work with the one we can see on the left, with war preparation and understanding, and also the practice continue to be good during this period until the end of Naqada to the least hit where for the chief and the center of power moving, and also the concept of hybrid and wounds will be used and emerging during this. They look like this one on the right. But during Naqada, there was a big transformation, and the object shows some elaborate and symbolic meaning. The people during this period experimented another kind of movement, thinking for this offensively, like this movement was here, and also the people use that very active period, working with human, integration of human, animal, and food, as well as the software. The message became more invasive than in the student shape, like that with this space. And during the Naqada, these objects show some power and wealth. People also, the balance really used in more rectangular sheet, and that some carbon, like the famous balance of normal, also the production usually would be followed and energy during this space, and now we have some wind and so let's come to about the site of Naqada itself, which not only because as the namesake of the Naqada culture, but also as the major archaeological site featuring both cemetery and settlement. The site is located in upper range approximately 55 kilometers north of Luxor and 640 kilometers south of Cairo. And it was an important sign during the whole of the BC as we said. So as you can see from the map on the right side of the picture, the site shows multiple cemetery areas like this. That's my cemetery, that one cemetery, and a few others. Recently, one of our companies has been work to rematch these prepared into the current tendency of the site, as we can see from this document on the left side. Among all of these cemeteries, the Main Cemetery is much important, not only because of its size, but also because the historical reaching that it has. It includes almost 1,918 tombs, which are our tombs of records of the Prophet, and also the burials that briefly discovered by medical use, to some burial references across the Iran people. So Petrie was the first one to execute the site in 1894, and his work was very important because it was the first time for the site to be established in a very systematic way. After Petrie, several other missions have worked there since it had been discovered by Petrie, and for more information about Petrie, start with the site. You can visit the Petrie online website where you can find the journal of Petrie, and also the very nice book written by Petrie by our unit of the by the head of the ritual source and reconciliation. So, but today the site of Naqada is in big danger because the setting is getting bigger and agriculture is burning across the city. Like what we can see from this that we can see the expansion of the agriculture from 2003 to 2024. This. And because of this, many of archaeological remains have been destroyed or totally lost. So we need to use all the records to learn more about this history. This is why Petrie archival material and notebook is very important for us, for the future research. Now I will hand over to my colleague Axel to give us a very short introduction about the idea behind our project. Thank you.
Shukran, Nader. Thank you very much. So at this point, you may be wondering, why do we reinvestigate this cemetery that we've known for such a long time? And the reason is, in the publication by Petrie, he only illustrated 17 graves out of almost 2,000, and he described 121. When I say described, sometimes it just says usual pottery, and that's it. So not a very thorough description. So in the 1960s all the way to the 1990s, Elise Baumgartel and then Joan Payne, who was a curator at the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, they began to retrace all of the objects that they could find from Naqada in different museums to make an inventory. And it's still a very important and useful work up until today. The problem, the main problem about their work is that it's completely museum-based, so it does not take any other type of information into account. In addition to these museum-based inventories that were also completed by our colleague Taichi Kuronuma from Tokyo Metropolitan University, and who has very generously shared his data with us for the scope of the project, we also use, as Nader was already hinting, the notebooks that we have kept from Petrie's excavations, the field notebooks by him and his team, as well as the pottery list that and that were relocated in the Petrie Museum in 2019. We also use the information from the original publication because despite the fact that there's not a lot of description of the tombs and of the context, there's a lot of information that is spread, especially in the plates, and that has not always thoroughly been matched with the objects in the museums or the information known in other archives. That's what our project was born from. We launched it in 2020 by research initiative for Egyptian young scholars and researchers. So you have their very nice pictures here. And so far, so we've completed phase 1 of the work, which is all of the tombs that featured in the pottery list, but not in the notebooks. That was the 735 tombs that we published in the recent article in the IFAO. And in the phase 2, we are now working on the tombs with a notebook, so that's all of the ones in dark gray here. All of that makes 1,500 tombs that have some kind of information preserved, and the ones in white are just, we don't know anything about them. We don't even know if they were just numbered and not excavated, which is also a possibility. And currently we are nearing the 1,000 tomb mark, so about 2/3 of the project, and I do hope the team will stay with me to complete that up until we're done. So as you can see, there was a long knowledge necessity of reassessing the contents of the tombs, compiling all of the sources in a less museum-centered way with attention to tomb layout especially and funerary practices, all of these informations that so far are absolutely not available, at least not in a systematic way, and by correcting the unfortunately many mistakes and contradictions between those different kinds of sources by soliciting all of them. And Nancy will tell you more about the different challenges that we've had to face throughout this 3 years of work.
Thank you. Axel very politely said that I'm going to present the dark side of our project, but I hope you bear with me until the end. That's why I'm all in black today. So we now turn to the challenges which we faced during our work with Petrie's archival material, as well as all of the museum-based inventories. And to be honest, we're not presenting them just to show you the complexity of our task, but also because we need to demonstrate how it is very essential to, to reassess these long unexploited and understudied materials. It's okay, I can do it. Thank you. So the first and the initial challenge which we faced was with the handwriting. And as you can see, this is a list of tombs from Petrie's pottery list, and it starts with tomb 1051 until 1064. And if we have a closer look at it, we can see that all of the zeros and the sixes look very much alike. They are mostly identical. And if we even have a closer look at tomb 160, you can see that the 2 zeros and the 6 are exactly the same. But that's a disaster. It's a nightmare for us. But anyways, in this case, it is just a string of numbers, so we can just figure it out from the sequence. But when it comes to a pottery type code or like a mark on an object that shows its or indicates its provenance, it would then be really difficult to differentiate between the 0 and the 6. So another really serious complication, and I'm sure most of you know it, is that Petrie's team, like Petrie and his team, of course, they excavated 2 neighboring sites at the same time, which are Naqada and Ballas. And what they did is that they named them with the exact same numbers, and they also compiled the pottery list at exactly the same time. And we found out from this that they had made confusions between the 2 lists. And as you can see here, we have this pot that's coded D59D, and by the way, this is how the types of pottery are named in Petrie's typology. So he used like letters and numbers to, to identify the different kinds of pots. So the D59D, as you can see, they realized that they had assigned it to the wrong list. So they put it in Naqada instead of putting it in Ballas. So what they did, they struck it out and they added it to the Ballas list. So of course, unfortunately, we're not 100% sure if such mistakes were actually done elsewhere and just went unnoticed or uncorrected. Another serious complication with the pottery list is that it's often incomplete. And we know this for a fact because, of course, we cross-reference with other sources, especially, of course, the notebook, the excavation notebooks, and also the original publication of Petrie. So we have an example here, which is tomb 147, and as you can see, it's incomplete. It only mentions one type of pot. But when we look at the notebook page of this tomb, we can see a whole dinner party of pottery. So another serious complication with the pottery list is that it is usually inaccurate, specifically in terms of defining the types of pottery. So this is, of course, problematic because the identification of types is really crucial to the dating of the tomb. And sometimes we did understand this because, like, for instance, in the case of this vase from tomb 378, this is a drawing done directly from the pot itself, but as you can see, it does not quite exactly match any of the types below. So what we came to is that whoever wrote this down or registered this pot just tried to find the closest type to it and typed it with this number. So, okay, so there is no problem with this, but in other cases, like this vase from tomb 280, the pottery list clearly labeled it as number R69C. But if we have a closer look at the types below, it does not at all look like the R69C. However, it perfectly matched the R68. And this is a serious issue because even if this change is considered to be small, okay, but it actually makes a huge difference in the dating of the tomb. And it can also, make it difficult for ceramologists to understand the development of the pottery shapes. So the pottery list do have its share of drawbacks, as we have already talked about, but it also, let's give it credit where it's due, because despite its flaws, it still offers some real benefits to us. And it really provided us with very valuable information and helped clearing up questions and inconsistencies which popped up from other sources which we used in our database. And as a good example for this is tomb 301, which in the museum-based inventory compiled by Elise Baumgartel, actually Baumgartel mentioned it as almost empty with only one known artifact. But when we checked the pottery list, we found that there are around 10 different types of pottery were located in this tomb. And before this, I'm going to take back the credit I've just given to the pottery list because I still have one flaw. So actually, the pottery list only mentions the types, but not the numbers. So this tomb could have even had several examples from each type, but of course, we don't know that, unfortunately. Okay, so as you have noticed, the issues of the incompleteness and inaccuracies does not only show up with the pottery list, but we have faced it also with the museum-based inventories. As in some cases, we find that the museum-based inventories have listed objects that supposed to come from specific tombs, but when we checked the original publication of Petrie and the notebooks of the excavations, we couldn't find any supporting evidence that would back this up. And as an example of this is tomb 162, which Payne said that they found 5 combs and 1 hairpin from this tomb. But when we checked the original publication of Petrie and even the excavation notebooks, we didn't find anything. And this is, this would be weird because like such distinctive finds, they can just went unnoticed. That's impossible because these kinds are original and usually Petrie would explicitly note them in his publication, but we couldn't find anything. And also we checked the publication of Ballas and the tomb, and we found out that the tomb 162 of Ballas actually dates back to the dynastic period, so it's impossible that the combs came from any of these tombs. So we came to 2 explanations, to be honest. Or let me say one explanation. So we think that it might that Payne, when she was working on the materials or on the objects, she found that, like, for instance, object number 1 comes from tomb 162. And then there are around 6 objects that have no mark, no identification, or no indication from where they came from. And then there is an object that's numbered 8, but it belongs to a different tomb. So she assumed that these unnumbered objects just come from the previous tomb, which is 162. But of course, all of these are just presumptions. We're not 100% sure, from where came this confusion. And among the sources which we incorporated in our database are the discoveries of our Japanese colleague, Taichi Koronoma. During his PhD, he surveyed collections which had not been taken into account by either Elise Baumgartel or by Joan Payne, such as those objects housed in the Penn Museum in Philadelphia, USA, and also the Manchester Museum in UK. He also was able to reattribute several objects to their right tomb number because the ink marking on them was just misread. We ourselves, during our recent trip to the UK, were able to re-identify several objects and even reattribute them to the right tomb numbers. And as a good example for this is this black top jar. We found it in the Birmingham City and Museum and Art Gallery. And this was not mentioned in any of the inventories, but we were able to reattribute it to tomb 326. As you can see, it's written actually on the base of it, the number of the tomb. Actually, another exceptional artifact that's such as this lapis lazuli and gold copper tube. Actually, this one skipped both Baumgartel's and Payne's inventories, despite being mentioned in Petrie's original publication, and it was only relocated in the 1990s, and you can currently see it on display in the Ashmolean Museum. But like we were wondering how come such a fascinating object just, like no one noticed it at all. But this was really so weird for us, especially as I said, Yani Petrie already mentioned it in his original publication, but no one noticed it. Yeah, moving back to the pottery lists, one of the biggest perks actually of their additions is that they allowed us to assign dates and even update the dates of approximately 255 and 54 tombs, which had no associated notebooks and even could not be dated before. And we have several examples, of course, but we're going to show you 2 examples of this. First is tomb 840, which previously was thought to be empty because we didn't have any data from the sources about it, but thanks to the pottery list, we're able to date it to Naqada 2C. Another example is tomb 826, which has also been, like its date has been updated from being dating to Naqada 2B, no, 2D. So we discovered that it actually dates to Naqada 2D instead of being dated to Naqada 2C previously. Yeah. Last but not least, the pottery list. Okay, thank you. So the pottery list have also enabled us to give a better date to tombs, where there was like a confusion between the pots located in Ballas and the pots located in Naqada. And we have a perfect example for this, which is tomb 396. If we follow Baumgartel, we'll find that she mentions specifically 2 kinds of pots, but thanks to the pottery list, when it was discovered, we found out that actually these 2 pots does not attribute to the 396 of Naqada. However, they relate to, or they came from the 396 of Ballas. Okay, and this have changed the date of this tomb from Naqada 1C 2B to Naqada 2D. That's a difference of 200 years. So yeah, these are just, very briefly the challenges which we faced during our work, phase one of our project. And as you can see, sorting through all of these archival materials and museum-based inventories have actually helped us to reshape our understanding of this whole great cemetery. But also some of the most exciting discoveries did not just come from sifting through all of these archival materials and inventories, but it mainly came from our direct encounters with the objects themselves. And with that, I'm gonna leave the floor, yes, to our colleague Nader. He will show you some of our truly fresh findings, which we uncovered during our visit to some of the UK museums. Here you go.
Okay, thanks to the support of the IFAO, the Flinders Petrie Museum, and also to Robert Anderson Trust, we were able to conduct a trip to the United Kingdom, where very special archaeological materials of Naqada were stored. We know that the archaeological material from Naqada are distributed between different museums around the world, but the most majority of them was stored in the United Kingdom, making this trip very important for us to understand, document, and better understanding these artifacts. So during this trip, we focused on photographing the objects that have never been shown before, and also to draw the pottery and lithics materials to confirm their types and features. And here I would like to thank our colleague Amani, the one who did most of the drawing of the pottery during this trip. In this trip, on the 1 week of work, we managed to study almost 300 pieces across 7 museums in the United Kingdom. And now let's highlight some of the unique finds from this trip. So this is a very interesting object. It looks like a hairbin, but on the other side, on the other side, it has a comb. It has a comb teeth, which could also be used also as a comb. Earlier studies said that older hairbin had fewer and longer teeth, like what we can see on the right side, and we agree with that because in the beginning of Naqada, the combs had from 4 5 teeth, and by the time it increased to be more, and even sometimes from 16 to 21 teeth. Another thing that we noticed new for the hairpin, that the early ones was flat, and by the time it turned to be rounded, and in this comb pin from the Naqada 2D had a rounded body like the later hairpin from the Naqada culture. Also, it has many small teeth at the other hand of the object, which confirms the ideas of this hair comb pin and its development through Naqada culture's phases. So we looked at this pendant in the Petrie Museum. It should look like the nicer one on the left side. It's eroded and totally damaged from its left part, and a part of the head, or right head, was also destroyed and lost. What is interesting about this one is someone is initially or on purpose made another small hole where the back of the birthday is. Maybe he would like to use it or wear it again. Kind of is, yeah. So, a long time ago, Petrie discovered this clothes, and he thought that it belongs to a falcon rather to a lion. But Baumgartel thought that it belongs to a lion rather to a falcon. To be sure, we asked our colleague Hannah Cornish from the USL College of the USL, and she confirmed that it belongs to a falcon rather to a cat or a big cat or a lion. And here we can see the difference between the clothes of the falcons and the big cat. Okay, another something which is important or interesting for us, while we were checking the boats in the museums of London, we saw that most of them, or some of them, had some holes in its bodies. And we find this case in 3 objects from the Birmingham Museum and 1 object from the Ashmolean. And this object is too big to be made by mistake during the firing process, and it could be also made on purpose. The thing is, it could be other objects have the same case but have never been studied yet, and also the museum do not take picture for the objects from its damaged part. And we need to look after this idea. Our colleague W.M.F specialized in the study of the shells and mollusks. While she was working in some of them in the Petrie Museum, she noticed something strange or new. That a part from the ligament, this soft tissues which connect the 2 halves of the shells still exist, and this part is usually lost. But because of the dry condition, maybe the dry condition of Naqada, it survived. W.M.F suggests that it could be buried very soon after it had been collected for some ritual reasons. Also, some of the shells had brown organic material on its surface and could be also support the same idea. Okay. While I was working also on the latex material from Naqada, I found this fish tail knife, which has a very fine denticulation on the edges. What is interesting for me that the denticulation appears only on the parts but not on the part for the handle. So from this, I would like to test the hypothesis of original variation in flint production across the Nile Valley, especially between the Naqada, Heracompolis, and Abydos. Also, while I was studying with Axel and other colleagues the cemetery T at the Naqada site, we would like also to investigate the distribution of the tombs and burial practices and the grave gods on the tombs to better understanding the context of the site of the cemetery B within the bigger or the wider setting of the cemetery of Naqada itself. So, and now I will hand over to my colleague Cinderella to give us a small introduction about the recontextualization.
So indeed, our project does not only focus on the artifacts, even though they bring very interesting information by themselves, but we also consider the layout of the tomb and its context, which is known through the notebooks, which have been underutilized till now in the previous works, which mostly focused on museums, as we mentioned before. This renewed attention to context provides fresh information, especially for interpreting burial practices. One of the interesting aspects is the practice of collective burials, which is currently being studied in detail by our colleague Nancy. It is more complicated than it may look, because the burial of more than one person might be people of the same family buried together across different times, but it also could have happened at the same time, or even a reuse of the tomb by someone who did not care that there is a previously buried body in it. Somehow, Petrie did not pay much attention to this element, only signaling that there were two bodies in a tomb, but without focusing on what this may mean. He was more focused on proving or disproving some theories specific to that time, such as the question of the dismembering of the head. And while we cannot provide a definitive interpretation for this moment, we came across an interesting fact. The number of collective burials, even if we found a few, as you can see on the screen, is very surprisingly low. It is less than 1% in the whole Naqada cemetery. It's striking, especially in comparison with other sites such as Naqada, which has about 23%, despite the fact that there are almost 2,000 tombs in Naqada and much less in Naqada. It also cannot be for chronological reasons, because the period of use of these two cemeteries overlapped. It remains an open question until the research is done more in depth, but it could be related to some kind of local specific practices. So, among the many challenges that we encountered during the recording process were the tombs that had no drawings in the notebooks. Fortunately, Petrie provided descriptions for some of them in his original publication, which do represent in many cases the only available data reporting the context of the finds. Therefore, we used this data to propose a hypothetical reconstructed plan of the tomb layout. Despite being hypothetical, the schematic reconstructions act as visual aids and releases information with less abstraction than the written description they come from. The pottery and objects have been drawn from actual artifacts as much as possible, but to convey that the tomb was plundered and to stress that the positions are not accurate, they have been scattered and drawn on the side, just as Petrie himself does in his notebooks. The items whose placement was not confirmed are rendered in gray. As an experiment, 3D renderings were created in the same manner, and they served the same purpose. However, the addition of textures and shadows gives the viewer an interpretation of how the tombs looked at the time of excavation, as we almost have no photos of the site. These drawings allow anyone that sees them to identify the context of the tombs, the contents of the tomb, even those not mentioned in the description, especially data from the pottery list, without needing to refer to each of the sources separately. In the reconstructed plan proposed for tomb T369, the L53 wide-shouldered jar and the R36 bowl that you can see here are known from the pottery list, and they have been added to other elements only known from the description, such as the ash jars, which Petrie describes as long and scanty, and thus they could only correspond to the elongated L30 jars. On the other hand, those two pottery types were not mentioned in the description, highlighting the benefit of making such a reconstruction that gathers all data together in one drawing. Also, note that the ox leg is represented with the corresponding hieroglyphic sign in order to avoid confusion with a human bone and to visually stress the schematic nature of the proposed drawing. And here's the 3D reconstruction for this tomb. Another advantage of reconstruction renderings is to visualize a site that no longer exists and cannot be visited. In the case of tomb 1490, the process was somewhat different. We already have Petrie's notebooks, the drawing, Elise Baumgartel's inventory with Payne's additions, and the pottery list, which we use to reproduce the types, and also the actual artifacts that were found in museums. So we used this data to reconstruct a virtual 3D tomb. However, in some cases, there are some missing data that could not be interpreted. In this case, Petrie describes a samaka, which he wrote in reference to an object. And while we can guess that he means fish, but wrote it in Romanized Arabic, thus meaning a fish-shaped palette, we are not that sure of his level of Arabic, and so we don't know if he used the word to refer to just fish palette or all palettes, which is further supported because he drew it as just a rectangular shape. So we choose to render these uncertain objects as white transparent shapes, so the viewer can understand how the tomb looked when it was found, but without inventing data that could not be verified. This context analysis is carried at the level of the tomb, but also at the level of the general distribution of artifacts in the whole cemetery, which is why we represent each tomb on the database using GIS in order to provide the ability of studying the concentration of different dating periods, for example, or different objects easily, such as this map, which shows the concentrations of combs and pins, which we used in the talk that the team gave at Origins, and which will be published soon, we hope. Based on the cross-checking, this map, this digital map was created based on the cross-checking of occurrences of numbers and their handwriting, and complemented by sketch maps found in 2 of the notebooks for parts of the cemetery. So the main reason that we created a database is to facilitate the cross-referencing process between the different sources that we have mentioned before, which in many cases are complementary, each of them providing a different aspect to each tomb in form of new objects or their current location, or assigning them to a completely different tomb. The database also allows us to gather in full the inventory of objects in one place. Many of these objects are now lost or scattered across many museums, mainly in the UK, but also extending to USA and Germany and other museums. Our database tries to follow the principles of open science with the goal of allowing access to as many images of the artifacts as possible gathered in one place for convenience, while still respecting copyrights. Thus, we try to use as much as possible the photos and the drawings done by our team. It is all the more important that the objects are very scattered, and many of the museums do not have images, or rather good quality images, on their websites. So all of the data we have already mentioned regarding tombs and objects are stored in an online database hosted on a software named Hurist, which was chosen because it's open source and because its interface is quite intuitive. It can also be easily migrated to other softwares in the future if needed. We have conceived and operated the database according to FAIR principles, meaning that its open data shall be accessible to everyone, hopefully by 2026, editable in the case of new discoveries, like objects in private collections, for example, resurfacing, and of course, searchable. So coming to searchability, and building on general good practice for databases, we have tried to ensure that everything is searchable by the following principles. First of all, we registered all numbers and dimensions as numerical values so that they can be searchable using numerical parameters as well, such as averages or more than, less than, in terms of the dimensions of the tomb, for example. Second, most information stored in the database is chosen from drop-down lists like the one you see here, which allows, or rather restricts, the freedom of choosing the word that you want, as you only have to select from the already registered standardized terms, which helps ensuring the consistency of data entry, not allowing several spellings for the same word and no duplicates. Third, also the structure of the database allows to combine keywords for different types. For example, materials with type of decoration with materials and with types of decorations, or materials and type of object, etc., which allows for running correlation analysis. Having one unified database allows us to reference and document the choices made in selecting the assemblages of each tomb, which is why such as why certain objects were included or attributed to a different tomb. And it also allows for the inclusion of all possible types, especially for pottery, which reduces loss of information and allows future researchers to follow the thought process that we used and the reasoning behind the choices that we have made, as well as edit it in case of emergence of new information. For example, in tomb 260, vases 16 and 20 are not present in the pottery list. So we propose an attribution based on Petrie's sketch of these pots, along with all similar types. And we include this process in the comments to avoid confusion between assumptions and actual reference data. Despite having many precautions to ensure the accessibility of the database, we are strongly aware of the possibility of data loss that comes with any digital platform. And this is why it will be paired with a paper publication at some point to ensure that the data is consistent. And this publication should also have a collection of schematic chapters. So now I give the floor back to Axel to discuss what's next to come.
Thank you for bearing with us. Sorry to go into so much detail about the methodology that we used in the database. We know that it's a little bit boring, but it's also, we feel important in this seminar that has a methodological purpose because we tried to strike the right balance between having a very standardized database that helps searchability, because no one can say enter Greyvac and someone enters schist, and so you have two things for the same material. But also we needed something that would be flexible enough for us to reflect all of our incertitudes, because due to the nature of the data that we're studying, a lot of things we don't necessarily know for sure if it pertains to, say, type A or type B of the pottery. And so we needed something in between, and that was for us the main challenge in terms of designing our database. So we were hoping maybe you would like to have a discussion about this topic. We hope that we were not too long and too boring. And to finish with, I really want to thank the whole team for their work for the past 3 years. You've done an amazing job. Our 3 presenters today specifically for presenting it very nicely today. We thank the IFAO for the amazing opportunities that we've been given, and especially the funding. By the way, you've seen the nice work that we can do when we go to museums, so maybe expect us asking for more funding in the future. and also, of course, the Petrie Museum for their support and help, and the Robert Anderson Trust for the funding that they have provided as well for this trip in the UK. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you everybody for this impressive presentation. I think this work is opening a wide range of possibilities, because you can ask your database for many things, for kind of objects, for datation, and I really wait for the moment that we will have finished all the 2,000 tombs in the, yeah. And I think that will be a kind of a salvage of this very important place, which has not been so well published. But by gathering all this information and connecting them each to other, I think you are getting to very impressive results. So I think there will be maybe some questions or some asking for more precision. Yeah, okay.
It's just about the ballast. It's really near of Naqada, right? Yes. But it's also tombs, or it was something totally different? It also tombs, but not from the 2,000 tombs. Okay. Okay, so the aim is to continue with ballast, no? to extend to ballast.
We also want to do that at some point, maybe with Cemetery T, and like everything deserves being redone. But yeah, we want to finish what we start. Also, Der El Ballas, we have a colleague working on that specific, like basically doing the same, but because it's much smaller, it only has 800 tombs. He's doing it as a side project, and he's already done some good work. He's called Bart Van Thun, but I don't know how to pronounce his name, but yeah.
Otherwise, we'll be obliged to create something like NUBTi for the Albalas.
And how far are you? How many more years you think before finishing? In an ideal estimation.
Well, I'm talking to the people who hand out the funding, so I won't gonna say 20. But no, kidding aside, well, I mean, we have been working for 3 years, but also, I mean, valorizing the results takes time. Basically, so far in 2025, that's all we've been doing, writing articles and doing talks. So we haven't been able to advance more on the database. And the first year, there was a lot of training to do with the team because not everyone was already a specialist of pre-dynastic, and we had a lot to, and also doing, making the database and so on, designing the database. So I think if we're optimistic, maybe 1.5 more years. If we're realistic, perhaps 2 or 3, if the team will bear with me more, some more time. But also now we are more trained, so we're we're somehow faster in recording the things. Also, the first few years we focused on the tombs that had no notebooks, but the tombs that have the notebooks are noticeably bigger and longer to record because we have to digitize the drawing, we have to try to read everything and transcribe, and then we have to enter all of the objects. When we were only working with the pottery list, as Zensi has explained, we knew only the type, we didn't know how many they were, but in the tombs, the real one that was actually recorded, we can see that usually one type is represented by at least 4 or 5 objects, so it balloons. Yeah.
Okay.
But it's also much more interesting. Obviously, we have more data, so we can't complain.
You were mentioning on the database slate equal greywacke equal blah blah blah. Maybe also for schist and maybe sometimes also basalt. They are usually all confused together. So maybe I mean there is basalt and there is greywacke, but they're often confused.
No, that's actually a very good point. Our database, thank you, Annette. Our database does not reflect actual petrographic identifications because none of us has the skill for that specifically. It reflects only what has been given as the material for the objects, also because many of them are lost. But usually they write, like Petrie writes slate.
Okay.
Sometimes also he writes samaka, even if it's not a samaka. So that's what it reflects. But in this case, so far, I don't think we've encountered any object in so-called slate, siltstone, blah, 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 that is not a palette.
Okay.
So in this case, greywacke usually means palette.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, but that's true that, like, say, if you see basalt or if you say agate, or even if you can see, we added, after a few months, we added embed in parentheses described as, just meaning like this is what the museum or Petrie has told us, but we have no idea, we are not specialists. Maybe if someone has the skill, one day they want to join, they can, I mean, again, the database is made to be updatable, so if they can add this kind of analysis, that would be amazing. Also, bone or ivory, there's a lot of confusion in the museums and in the notebooks and so on. Yep. If one day someone wants to separate everything and do the work, that would be so nice.
I was also wondering how accurate are the dates of Naqada 1, 2, 3?
So what dates? The relative or absolute?
Both. I mean, how can we be sure of the dates proposed by Petrie or corrected afterwards? Are they?
No, I'm gonna get a lot of enemies if I answer this question now. So
I don't know.
My idea, my theory, or like my instinct so far is that they're not that accurate, but a lot. Like to summarize very quickly, a lot of people do still, or rather do follow there is an understanding, a consensus to follow an edited version of the Petrie dates that we do not follow, by the way. We follow the updated version, but I still think this could be improved, but I need to gather more data for this. So I want us to finish doing the work on the tombs so that we can point out, look, in our current understanding, this is impossible. This is an impossible assemblage. We have types that should not belong together, and yet they were found in the same tomb. And this we talked a little bit about in the BFAO article in the last sections, but so far it's just an instinct, and we don't have enough elements to point, okay, now we need to rework the chronology.
Merci. Thanks a lot, dear colleagues. I have two questions. It will be on an open access with the IFAO or with other institutions?
Yes, it will be accessed by everyone.
Everyone.
It's publicly accessible.
Yes, from the IFAO database.
So the hosting currently is not with the IFAO because the website is going under reconstruction and so on. So we did this with this software that is independent but backed up by the ministry, and we are currently working to get the database online because we want more features that are not in Jurist. Especially we want to be able to turn on and off the layers of the image, so you can get Petrie's notebook, our transcription, and on and off, that you could click on an item on the drawing and get onto its page, because currently you cannot do that, and that would be really more useful and user-friendly for everyone. So all of these features, Jurist does not have. It's a great software, it's very intuitive, but it lacks some advanced features. So now we're working with a programmer, with a developer, so that we can get a better version. And then I don't know what we'll do with it. Maybe we'll indeed host it at the IFAO if the IFAO wants to, because also it would ensure more long-term presence on the net, but don't know. Okay. But in any case, our goal is that it would be accessible anyways, so regardless what institution hosts it, we don't want it to be for money, and we don't want it to be for only a fraction of people. Yeah, exactly.
And my second question is about the 3D of the tomb. You will do for all the tombs a 3D? Oh.
Well, for 2000, I don't think I'm able to do the 2000. But I'm actually working on doing the 3D reconstructions for one part of the tomb for my master's thesis. So hopefully it will advance by time to include more.
How do you choose them?
Usually, the first ones that we started with were the tombs that had a description in the notebook and no drawing, because it's just very abstract. And so without even a notebook, you can't really get an idea of how the tomb looked like. So that is the main idea, to start with the ones that doesn't have a drawing, just the description, and maybe at some point expand to more ones. Thank you.
There's about 500 that we have absolutely no data anymore, and there's about 700 where we have no clue how it was arranged, because the only remaining archive that we have is the pottery list and some objects in the museums. So we are not going to do a 3D based on thin air. Exactly. But whenever we have at least a little bit of a description or the notebook as a basis, it can be done. Then I don't know if Cinderella will have the time to do them all, but at least it's a nice experiment.
First of all, I have one question related to the GIS. At some point you talked about the GIS, so it will be published also, or it will be in just internally, and it will be connected to the Hearst database or not? And the second question, for the photos, it will be published also, and if it will be the case, it will be in the Hearst or the database. Actually, the database, it will be also for only for data, or it will include also photos.
Yeah, if I can. Thanks, Mazen. Okay, so the GIS is embedded into Jurist. It has a GIS feature. It's a basic one. It's just like showing the position of the tomb when it fits your request. So say if you want indeed like all of the tombs that have a comb, or all of the tombs that have an object made of amethyst, it will show it to you. as far as we can, because we have to base ourselves on the map that Petrie did and some additions from the notebooks, but still not all of the tombs are represented in the map. So some of them, many of them actually, I don't know the percentage, but I would say it's about 20%, but we don't know where they were. And they are not numbered in a very precise way, so we cannot say, oh, probably it was in this area. So we don't want to imagine. But for the ones that we have the data, as much as possible, we do that, yeah. And then the second question for the photos, I'm a little bit of a pirate. So as far as I'm concerned, I would like to be able to just release all of the photos online regardless of copyright. That is, of course, not possible in the world that we live in. For example, some objects are in the Boston MFA. That is, I think, a private museum. At least they act like one in terms of the fees that they ask for. So of course, we're not going to just release photos from them without their. So we will have to get agreement from all of the museums, but this is why it's much easier for us to take our own photos. And the ones that we've taken and the drawings that Amani did of the pottery or that Neder did of the flints, of course, they belong to us as a team, and we're very happy to share them because that's the goal. That's like, in an ideal world, you get in the database and you get photos of all of the objects that you can find in museums and private collections. But we will have to work with the copyrights. So it will not be as ideal as that.
Was there something above the tombs? They were marked or they were just buried? We don't know.
I mean, maybe there was, but we're talking about the 1894 way of excavating. So if there was a very tiny marking, maybe they didn't know it. Also, it was quite plundered, no? But in terms of like really superstructure, no. Before Naqada 3, we have nothing. And even after Naqada 3, there's some brick lining to the tombs sometimes. But as far as has been said in the archive and the publications, no superstructure. In Hierakonpolis, they have the first examples of superstructure, but that's not, I mean, that's very specific to this site, not for Naqada. إحنا الناس الغلبانين.
No other question? So I just want to insist once more on the importance of this project, and I'm quite sure that many colleagues are still underestimating the impact of this kind of work, because one must not forget that all the sequence dates that are giving the general guidelines of the chronology of the Naqada period are based on this Naqada material. So the new estimation of this material, no consideration of this material could very well change the way that you are giving a chronology for this period, among others. So thank you very much for this project, and I hope that it will continue till its end with other articles and a nice volume published about all the work that you have done.